A couple of years ago, Beijing accused the CIA of secretly fueling the trend of effeminate or sissy celebrities called fresh little meat in China. The report authored to support this accusation zeroed in on the 1962 creation of Johnny and Associates talent agency in Japan as the origin of this campaign of brainwashing, as they call it, targeting young men in China. Johnny Kitagawa, an American of Japanese descent, interestingly arrived in Tokyo with bags of money and in a short amount of time began to control the entertainment industry in that country. The Chinese government believed that Kitagawa was a CIA-backed asset, and because of his closeted but widely known homosexuality, he was used to churn out effeminate male celebrities. And as well, the Chinese argued that the United States was then intent upon suppressing the masculinity of Asian men. Interestingly, shortly after his death, the full scale and story of Kitagawa's iron grip on the Japanese entertainment industry was fully fleshed out, as was his decades-long penchant for pederasty with young male talent wanting to break into show business. The Far East or East Asian trend of sissy celebrities then moved on to South Korea, where it's been embraced to an even larger extent than it has been in Japan. However, China, in a complete rejection of Japan and Korea, as well as the direction of the Western world, is yet again carving its own path with regards to social issues. China rejects the Western model of an ever-changing moral compass that has no consensus. And that has come to define, for good or ill, the Western world. Meaning, what is taboo in the West one day is just fine the next, and vice versa. Thus, in recent years, the Chinese government, all the way up to President Xi, has had enough of the Zhao Zhang Rao, or the fresh little meat phenomenon. And this buzzword, if I were to define it, refers to young Chinese male icons or talents who are seen as squeaky clean, traditionally feminine in demeanor, with delicate, usually hairless features and overtly twinkish in appearance. And then recently, China's National Education Ministry caused a stir after it suggested young Chinese men had become too feminine and announced a plan to strengthen masculinity and masculine education for boys. So it probably comes as no surprise that the Chinese government is now calling feminism and all that goes with it a foreign plot meant to undermine the Middle Kingdom. But is it? As nations debate the influence of foreign ideas on their cultural fabric, individuals too are seeking ways to fortify their personal resilience and vitality to navigate these societal shifts. And one way to do so is by prioritizing health and energy, which brings us to the cutting-edge solution. So then, let's talk about NMN from Black Forest. It's a game-changing supplement that boosts NAD+ in your body, promoting health, longevity, and energy. Dr. Andrew Huberman, a Stanford neuroscientist, recently discussed on Joe Rogan's podcast how NMN's incredible benefits have pharmaceutical companies scrambling to patent it as a prescription drug.
We were talking, I think last time we spoke about supplementation as it relates to, metabolic pathways. And one thing I've been tracking pretty closely is this whole, the NMN thing has now taken a different direction.
I was going to bring that up before we wrap this up. So let's explain NMN for people. It's a precursor for NAD+.
Right. NAD is critical to energy production in all cells, vital. And levels of NAD tend to go down as we age. It's an absolute requirement for cellular health and life. You need it. Some years ago, as David Sinclair came on this podcast and discussed that his laboratory, he's a tenured professor of genetics, Harvard Medical School, and other laboratories are starting to explore stimulating the NAD pathway as a tool for extending lifespan. You can't just take NAD, or you can, but it doesn't get into cells very easily. There are basically two ways that you can tickle this pathway, increase NAD. One is to take NMN. NMN could soon be a prescription drug that you can only get with a prescription. And then I think Metro International Biotech will likely hold the patent. I will say with NMN, a couple of things happen. First of all, energy, my recovery from workouts much better. I had to take it early day because it was giving me a lot of energy. I did notice my hair and nails growing at a ridiculous rate. And then I came off it just as a control experiment, slowed down again. So it was really interesting. I think there's something there in cellular growth pathways.
Interesting.
You'll feel the difference. More energy, faster workout recovery, and it's a vital part of maintaining a healthy lifestyle. I myself am stocked up, and you should be too before it's locked behind a prescription wall. And right now, for the next 48 hours, use the link in the description for an exclusive deal. And that is buy 2 NMN bottles and get 1 free. Grab yours at blackforestsupplements.com/pigeon and get yourself feeling better, as your health is the most important thing you have. It's been a few years since those in the Far East who wished to emulate the current cultural revolution around gender and sexual orientation, now playing out in the Western world, faced significant pushback. But now, a court in Japan has ruled that banning same-sex marriage is constitutional, throwing out 3 separate damages lawsuits claiming that the government's ban on same-sex marriage is unconstitutional. The lawsuit revolved around the interpretation of marriage in Article 24 of the Charter, which stipulates marriage shall be based only on the mutual consent of both sexes, and it shall be maintained through mutual cooperation with the equal rights of husband and wife as a basis. It should very much be noted that the Osaka court acknowledged the disadvantages that same-sex couples face, but that those disadvantages have eased over time. Also, that, quote, there has not been enough discussion among the Japanese people on what kind of system is appropriate to realize benefits for such couples, closed quote. Thus, the 1,000-gender ideology trumpeted from the rooftops in the West doesn't seem to be playing out in the same manner in the East. Moreover, with the introduction of partnership rights for same-sex couples in Japan, along with rising support in public opinion polls, this could change. But as the court stated, there has not been enough discussion amongst the people in Japan. I think it's very notable how the court in Japan considers the social norms of society before attempting to overturn them via court diktat, regardless of the general consensus, as often happens in the West. The idea of social harmony is taken very seriously in East Asia, probably nowhere more so than in Japan. However, every article I've read on this ruling from the Western media outlets makes what I assume the writers thought were disparaging comparisons of Japan with the West, noting that, quote, it underscores how divisive the issue remains in Japan, the only member of the group of 7 major industrialized nations that does not recognize same-sex unions, closed quote. I'd like to remind mainstream media journalists that same-sex marriage is only recognized in 38 countries worldwide, primarily in Europe and their colonial offshoots, with the Netherlands being the first to do so in 2001, and countries like Germany and Australia following in 2017, and Austria as late as 2019. That's only 6 years ago. Also, what's very important when looking at Japan and China, but also countries like Turkey, Russia, and India, is they do not only believe themselves to be nations, but consider themselves civilizational states. And thus, change, unlike in the West, takes time. That's why in Japan, the Supreme Court recently has upheld a law requiring that transgender people undergo gender transformation surgery to have their gender changed on official documents. But that doesn't mean it always works, because in late December 2021, the Japanese Supreme Court rejected a plaintiff's appeal who sought to legally change her gender status after getting gender reassignment surgery. The reason being, the court denied the request for the very reasonable reason is that she is raising a child, and the social effects it would have on said child were to be considered. Thus, in their ruling, the court upheld the legal requirement that those with gender dysphoria seeking to change their gender status must not be raising a minor. Now, perhaps in time, these changes to existing laws may happen. But again, the Far East, and Japan in particular, is not in the midst of a cultural revolution meant to deconstruct society. When these changes do occur, there will be more consensus within society on these issues, once there has been enough discussion amongst the people of Japan. I'd also like to add that Japan is not some kind of authoritarian state. It works on social cues and consensus. And that's why during the initial lockdowns in 2020 for the supposed pandemic, the government was very clear that they had no legal instruments to force people into lockdowns, close businesses, or compel people to be vaccinated. They provided advice, but allowed people to make up their own minds for themselves and their families. And in a way, this is a kind of alien concept in the West these days, as its current cultural revolution has more in common with the Cultural Revolution of China, with the desire of both revolutions then and now to destroy the four olds: old ideas, old culture, old customs, and old habits. As the Western world deconstructs itself in its own cultural revolution, China in the 21st century is going the other way, attempting, as discussed earlier, to create a more traditional expression of social culture within their country. As reported in The Economist, and of course deemed unfortunate by them, China's elites have come to the conclusion that feminism is a foreign plot against the country. So why do Chinese elite think feminism is a foreign plot? Well, the article states, quote, "Party leaders see China as a socially conservative country and rarely seek to challenge that chauvinism. Just one member of the 25-strong Politburo is a woman. President Xi Jinping lauds China's excellent traditional culture," closed quote. Observers say what is being masked is that China's elites would rather blame social ills on the wrongdoing of criminals than admit that individuals have rights. For example, a sensational story of an unprovoked attack on several women by drunken thugs at a late-night barbecue in Tangshan gripped social media in that country, in what the author of The Economist article called a striking example of the issue, stating that Chinese leaders are more threatened by feminists than by violent gangsters. Anyway, the article continues, "Faced with this challenge to China's self-image as a harmonious, low-crime society, officials, state media, China's largest social media platforms, and even a university dean have lined up to denounce the notion that China has a problem with gender-based violence. There are several explanations for this eagerness to blame thugs rather than sexism. One is that China, a control-obsessed state, often treats societal ills as problems of national security and politics." A former Chinese policeman, now a sociologist at the University of Macau, said that feminism is more politically sensitive because it draws social energy from social movements that are not under the party's control. In sum, the article states that a note sent by the dean of the School of Sociology at Wuhan University went viral after he told students concerned about the Tangshan assault to beware the American ideology of fist-waving women, a crude pun on the Chinese word for feminism. As an aside, I'd also like to note that China reportedly has an excess of 35 million more males than females, mostly stemming from the one-child policy, giving the country perhaps the most warped gender ratio on Earth. That is, as well as places like Canada and Sweden. That said, studies show a correlation between gender imbalance within a society and a rise in violence, crime, and social dysfunction. Of course, nobody should condone gender-based violence, but there have been various studies that confirm, deny, or lay claim to a host of different conclusions on this subject. But I do think we can agree that there is a physical and mental shift, of course, taking place in the Occident, but now slowly in the Orient toward more feminized societies. I think everybody understands that China is a very different society from those found in the Occident, and what is clear is that the Chinese government's skepticism toward feminism, at least I think so, stems from its belief that the ideology clashes with the nation's cultural and political priorities. China, as stated previously, is a civilizational state, and it emphasizes social harmony, collective stability and traditional values over individualist ideologies like feminism, which is often perceived as a Western import. Feminism's focus on gender equality and individual rights, well, it challenges the hierarchical structures ingrained in Chinese society, where familial roles and state authority are paramount. It would also seem as though the state believes that feminism could disrupt the Confucian emphasis on duty, particularly for women who are traditionally expected to prioritize family over personal ambition, especially now, more than ever, given the very real issue the country has with its low birth rate. Moreover, China's leaders view feminist activism as a potential catalyst for social and societal unrest, especially given its association with foreign influences that could undermine the Communist Party's control. The gender imbalance in the country, exacerbated by the one-child policy, further complicates the adoption of feminist ideals as societal pressures prioritize male-dominated frameworks to address this demographic challenge. In a society where stability is valued over rapid social change, feminism's push for systematic upheaval is seen as incompatible with China's goal of maintaining a cohesive, state-driven cultural identity. While I'm sure there will be more online controversy regarding all issues brought up in this presentation, the one thing Communist China is good at is turning on a dime, whether economically or socially, and acting on plans handed down from the central authorities if there is a real threat to social harmony in their civilizational state. And it's without question to even the most casual observer that there has been a massive transformation in Western society in only the past decade and a half at most. But like the yin and yang, both masculine and feminine energies need to be in balance for a healthy society. Given that both the Occident and much of the Orient are now incapable of even reproducing themselves at minimum, I would say that both civilizations currently are not healthy, and that the avatar for our dysfunctional age in the West, at least, is the culture war, something it would appear the East is desperate to not import. But maybe a shakeup is something China could use. The West, for its part, could also desperately use a shakeup, but like in most things, is too afraid to look at the reality of its own reflection, as that abyss is just too frightening for some to even contemplate. As the West chooses to classify masculinity as toxic, the Chinese wish to reclaim it, or at least not label it as malignant. In the case of calling feminism a foreign plot, well, maybe the Chinese have gone too far the other way. Anyway, it will be interesting to see which civilization gets it right and which gets it wrong on this question. I know most people have the attention span of a fruit fly, so if you're still here watching this video, thank you very much. It's much appreciated. If you like it, please give it a thumbs up on the way out if you'd like to help the channel. It'd be very much appreciated. Ways of doing so are in the description. Also remember to check out Black Forest Supplements and their amazing products that can help you be a better you. With that, I'll see you again in the next video. Bye for now.